Before I came to the Graduate Center, I did an undergraduate degree at Simon Fraser University, which is just outside of Vancouver, and before that I grew up in a town called Sydney in Nova Scotia on the east coast of Canada. So I actually got interested in philosophy when I was in high school. I started reading books by Nietzsche and Sartre and stuff like that, and then slowly that transitioned into a more of an interest in analytic philosophy through people like Wittgenstein. So when I was an undergraduate, my interests got into the philosophy of language, and the Graduate Center is, one of the 3 or 4 best philosophy of language programs in the English-speaking world. So that it just was a natural place for me to apply, and when I got in, I was really excited to come here. So my main project right now is my dissertation, and the purpose of that dissertation is to come up with a new foundation for the study of meaning in natural language, so natural language semantics. The basic idea behind most of the way that linguists and philosophers have studied meaning for the last 50 years or so has been that the meaning of an expression, a sentence or a word, is something about what the sentence or the word represents. So the sentence's truth conditions, or the words, the words referent, or the concept that it expresses, and that works fine for some words like proper names. So the name, the name Daniel refers to Daniel. That seems to sort of capture its meaning pretty well. But then there are other words and sentences that seem to be tied a lot more to the way that we use them rather than to what they stand for. So for example, the word that, we can use it to refer to all kinds of different things in different circumstances. And imperative sentences like keep listening, that doesn't seem to be, the meaning of that sentence doesn't seem to be capturable by saying what it stands for or what situation it represents. And so my dissertation tries to incorporate a better account of these kind of use theoretic considerations into a theory of linguistic meaning. Natural language semantics is this research program that's been going on in philosophy and linguistics since around the middle of the 1960s, and figures like Donald Davidson and Richard Montague came up with these systematic ways of showing how the meaning of a sentence depends on the structure of the sentence and the words that are in the sentence. And they've made all kinds of progress in that regard. They've got mathematically precise ways of showing how all this stuff works. It's just that in some cases their way of showing how sentence meaning depends on word meaning doesn't seem to capture these expressions that don't seem to be about representing the world as being a certain way, but seem to be something more about how we use the expressions to do things. So to get people to have certain kinds of thoughts, or to get people to perform certain kinds of actions, or to refer to different things in different circumstances. And so the sort of project that I'm interested in is about trying to incorporate those more context-sensitive aspects of meaning into semantics. The figures that I'm most influenced by in my own work include the ordinary language and speech act theoretic traditions like J.L. Austin and John Searle and Paul Grice, and actually some members of this department like Stephen Neal. What the people in those traditions have done a good job of is shown how linguistic meaning is tied to the way that communities of speakers actually use words and sentences to sort of produce effects in each other, rather than just how those words and sentences themselves kind of stand in relations to the world. On my view, the meaning of an expression is the type of speech act that we can perform with it, right? So a speech act is basically a speaker's contribution to an episode of communication. And so whereas the sort of dominant tradition in linguistics thinks of the meaning of an expression as sort of what it stands for or what it refers to or something like that, the speech act theoretic approach to meaning that I advocate thinks of the meaning of an expression as sort of what we do with it. So I've given quite a few different talks around New York City and at some different graduate conferences around North America, so in Ontario and in British Columbia, and I gave a talk at UCLA a couple of years ago. And I've been lucky enough also to get to travel to Europe a couple of times, and I've given a talk in Latvia and one in France, and attended some other conferences in other parts of Europe, quite a few actually. So yeah, I mean, I've gotten a few of these doctoral student research grants that the Graduate Center gives out to students. They can be worth up to $1,500, and I've gotten those a couple of times, and those have supported my travel to Budapest to go to a big summer school there, and to Latvia to go to a big summer school there. And there are also some smaller sort of $300 to $500 awards that I've gotten to go to other conferences. So in the spring at the Pacific APA, the American Philosophical Association in San Diego, I'm going to present some work that I'm co-authoring with Rachel McKinney, another student here at the Graduate Center. The basic idea behind this work is that when speakers are communicating and they're in a position of power imbalance, the more powerful person in the conversation can in a certain sense, extract speech from the less powerful member of the conversation. So one place that this plays out, and that Rachel has a bunch of other work on that's really interesting, is in contexts like police interrogation, right? So there are all kinds of tricks and different ways that police officers can use to basically get the people they're interrogating to say things that they don't necessarily mean or wouldn't want to say or don't even recognize themselves as saying. And so we're sort of interested in the mechanisms by which that takes place. The Graduate Center is one of the best places in the world to study the philosophy of language. That's what I study. It's a pretty big, vibrant department with all kinds of really interesting research going on across lots of different disciplines. So I've had occasion to learn not only from a bunch of really great professors, but also from lots of other students who work on things like the philosophy of mind and philosophy of biology and logic and philosophy of art and just about everything. Also, the Graduate Center is right in the middle of probably the most exciting philosophical community in the world right now, centered around New York, but including like Rutgers and Princeton and Yale and a few other schools that are all kind of part of this huge community of people whose work is all feeding into each other. So I was involved in founding the New York Philosophy of Language Workshop a couple of years ago, and that's a group where we have weekly talks by different philosophers of language. It started out mostly with graduate students from around the New York area, and we've kind of branched out and gotten people in from all over the world at this point, including some philosophers and some linguists, and both students and junior faculty and postdocs. And we've had at this point about 40 talks by people from all over the place. Yeah, so this September I was one of the co-organizers of a big conference on speech act theory, and we had sort of philosophers and linguists come from all over North America and a couple from England to give talks about speech act theory, which is sort of one of the traditional topics in the philosophy of language for the last 50 years or so. And we were lucky enough to just have an enormously great turnout. So we had John Searle as one of our speakers, and we had Ray Langton, who came from Cambridge, to talk about some of her applications of speech act theory to social and political philosophy. And I co-organized that conference with a student from Columbia and a student from NYU. These are the guys with whom I organized the New York Philosophy of Language workshop, and the Speech Act conference kind of really grew out of that workshop. I've taken classes at both NYU and Columbia, and I've sat in on classes at Rutgers, and I've, at one time or another, been to philosophical events at just about every school in New York City. So lots of times at Columbia, at Princeton, at NYU, at Rutgers. As I said before, the philosophical community in New York City is sort of unrivaled, and it is pretty closely knit. So I think that the best thing about living in New York City is actually how many smart and interesting people that you run into everywhere. So I noticed this pretty soon after getting here, right? I went to a few different parties with people that I knew, and it seemed like every person that I had a conversation with did something interesting and had interesting stories to tell and were really good at what they did. And I think that's the most exciting thing about living here.